All right, you filthy animals, let's knock out this fuel system. I went ahead and mounted the Fuelab setup. You guys probably recognize this fuel pressure regulator from previous videos. Now it has a neoprene rubber backing to help isolate it from vibration. This down here is a 10 micron fuel filter. Really sweet setup. I like it a lot because when I inevitably go to E85, I can swap out the cellulose cartridge in here for a stainless mesh. At the end of the video, I'm going to list all the parts used in this entire fuel system as well as any equipment used, and I'll also list it down below in the description. This is the factory SR20 fuel rail with upgraded injectors. I'm not quite ready to upgrade to the top feeds just yet, so I needed a way to adapt 5/16 to a 3/8 so I can run it to my fuel filter and my fuel pressure regulator. I was going to use this little reducer here that goes from 3/8 to 5/16 with some Gates barricade hose so it's E85 compliant, but I think I have a better idea. Here's an old S14 SR fuel rail that I found on my spare parts bin. What I think I'm going to do is come over here, chop this end off right where it hits that union, and I'm going to weld on these -6 AN steel fittings. So I'll remove this NPT portion and then I'll weld it onto here, and I think for $5 that's an excellent solution for keeping the whole entire system -6. Well, I'm not gonna lie, that was a lot easier than I thought it was gonna be. So now I'm gonna go ahead and clean up this rail, TIG weld the fittings on, and call it good. Welded the fittings on. They didn't give me any trouble at all. Really confident in the setup. So now I'm gonna clean the whole rail, get it installed on the truck, and start working on the push lock lines. And there you have it. The rail is officially -6. Cleaned everything up, masked it off, tossed on some epoxy, let it cure, put my little decal on. Yeehaw. For the soft lines, I chose to use this Parker 3/8 push lock hose. What's really cool about it is that it exceeds the J30 R9 SAE rating, and it's compatible with many different fuel types, including E85. I believe the lining is FKM. And for the fittings, I use these Earl -6 to 3/8 push lock that are designed to be used with this hose. And then I have these Milwaukee cutters, which cut like a dream. Love them. So hopefully by the end of this, we will end up with something like that. Now that I have the fuel line routing kind of planned out, I can go ahead and make my supply line. So run it from here to right here on the fuel filter. Notice, leave myself a little room for some slack. Say right here. Turn this back up. Just double check. It's about where I need it. Yep, okay. Come over here. Line this up nice and straight. And then the cut. All right, now that I have the fitting locked in the soft jaws, which I highly recommend getting this so you don't mar up the surface, I'm gonna put just a little bit of assembly lube to get things started. Now, you can use a silicone lubricant as well. I just like the assembly lube, works pretty good. So just kind of put it on there just to get things going. Don't need a whole lot at all. And also to further simplify the process, I like to put my heat gun at the lowest setting, so it's basically like a hair dryer. And then I'm gonna warm up the tubing. I'm not gonna overheat the tubing, but essentially get it to where this thing was just sitting outside on a hot summer day. That's all I'm looking for. So I can still touch it, manage it, but it's a little bit more pliable. You can see it's not super duper hot. I can put my hand in front of it. We're not trying to affect the integrity of the rubber. We're just trying to make it a little bit easier to get on there. Okay, almost. Okay, give that a shot. Yep, just warm to the touch. And then we're just gonna put it on and press. And the way this works is kind of like a Chinese finger trap. Once it goes on there, passes the barbs, the second you try to pull it back and away from it, it constricts this area and makes it a lot tighter. So they don't require a clamp on these at all. Very neat little setup. And there we go. Now let this cool off and we're good to go. We'll make the other connection. Set this thing on here. About right there. Perfection. Then I can support this under here, clears the upper part of the intake manifold, and then I can run my return side. And we can clean up all this stuff under here as well. Looks pretty good. So I'm gonna start making all the other lines. I think this turned out pretty good. So let's go ahead and move on to routing the hard lines under the truck. All right, so here is the hard line I'm using to run the longer links underneath the truck. This is 3/8 inch NICOP or nickel copper tubing. I really like this stuff because of its corrosion resistance as well as its chemical resistance. Also, it has a slightly more rigid sidewall to it than say like aluminum tubing, where if you're working this stuff by hand, which it is very workable by hand, it's nice because the sidewall doesn't want to collapse on you if you bend it just a little too far in one direction. I do like the look of aluminum tubing a lot better versus the copper, but I think with black ends, it'll look pretty good either way. So when you buy your hard line, it comes spiraled up like this, but they do make these nifty little tools. For 35 bucks, I got this one. Has all these little stacked lined up rollers in there. It allows you to place it onto the tubing, push it along, and it straightens it out as it goes, so you end up with something like this. Now, this run is like a little over 11 feet long. As you can see, it looks nice and straight. There's no weird segments. It's not all wavy. Granted, it does have a slight little bend to it just because I was doing it in the air and it was sagging, but I could easily straighten that out by hand. And once everything is fixed underneath the truck with the ADL clamps, it's gonna be perfect. For hard lines, I'd normally use a flaring tool like this. Clamp it in the vise over there, and then you come back, load in the corresponding dies for whatever fittings you're using, and you'd make the perfect flare. The problem with this is, A, the tool's kind of expensive, even though I already own it, but B, the other issue is that these hard lines are gonna be one continuous run from front to back with no connector unions, which means I can't just pull this thing right out the front very easily because I don't have enough room, and then risk damaging the hard lines if I keep pulling it out of the back. So I wanna kind of get everything in place and then work as I go. So I'm gonna try something a little bit different this time. This nifty little piece of engineering is called a compression fitting. I've never used them before, but I'm anxious to try it out on this project. I think it'd be perfect, so let's learn how to do it. And here's the anatomy of the compression fitting. So you have the compression end that goes on the tubing first. You have the compression ferrule that goes on the tubing second. And then you have your -6 end that goes on the tubing end. That's what you connect your soft lines to. First, we'll take our piece of tubing. So imagine this is ran underneath the truck, and we're gonna first start by putting this one on. Okay, and then we'd put on our compression fitting like so. And you'll know you bought quality products because it's a nice snug fit like this. There's no back and forth wiggle or anything like that. So you end up with something that doesn't move around. In this case, quality products are really important. So that way you can end up with a good fit like this. Then we'll take this end, install it. You'll notice that it stops. It's because there's a landing inside of here that the tubing sits flush with. Then you would put these two together. Oops. You install these, and then they'll line up just like that once they become snug because these are precision machine pieces. And you'll take your AN wrenches and you'll either do one full turn on the nut side, or you'll do half turns each way with the wrenches. And then that's all you need. And if you need to snug it up a little bit more later, you can do so. But what's nice about these is you'll know you're in the right place because these will end up lining up again. Last thing, if you decide to use one of these tubing cutters, just know you can get really good results with it. You just need to be a little patient. The tubing will sit in here on these self-aligning rollers. You'll always get a nice straight cut, but you definitely don't want to crank down on it or else you risk folding the end of this and getting a conical shape, and that's not something you want. You want a nice, straight, flat profile. So the way I always do it is I get it in here, I get it to where it bites down on it. I'll make the rotation. Once it loosens up, I'll just go 1/8 of a turn at a time. And this ensures that I don't bend that piece down. You'll end up with a small lip inside that's called a burr. Use a standard deburr tool. Just remember, this is a lot harder than this, so you can ruin it if you really crank on it. And you'll just lightly deburr it, blow it out with an air compressor, and you're good to go. So I just finished routing all of the hard lines under the truck all the way back to the fuel cell, and I'm really happy with how everything turned out. Now there are a few changes that I made, and there's a few changes that I will be making here in the near future. For one, I didn't know they made a 30-degree push lock fitting, so I went ahead and ordered one of those. This is a 45, and by putting the 30-degree, these will be nice and parallel to one another and, you know, match a little bit better. Two, on this fuel hanger assembly, I swapped things around. So this used to be the return, that was the feed, and this was a vent port. So now this is gonna be my supply and return. So when I go to install the Hydramat, I'm gonna swap everything around under there so it matches appropriately. And then I started working on my rollover vent. And my thought process on this is if I was to slam on my brakes and all the fuel rushes to the front and it tries to travel up this, it's not gonna wanna go back this way. And also if I accelerate, all the fuel's gonna go away from the vent and it's not a problem to begin with. And I didn't really want to put a plumber's trap in here in the event that fuel got stuck in the bottom of it and it wouldn't vent properly. So that's why I didn't do that. And then I put a long piece of copper tubing in here. That way I could ear clamp this vent on as well as mount it to this piece right here. And you'll notice the lines, how they run, they're stepped up right here. And the reason I did it is so I could run it underneath the bed, because I thought about putting the whole center section of my bed back on, maybe making some provisions for the upper coilover mounts and trying to snake it around the fuel cell. So in the event that I ever wanted to do that, I kind of kept that in mind. Also, I gave myself a little bit of wiggle room here. In the unlikely event that this axle was to compress all the way up into the C-notch, so basically the bottom side of the C-notch is resting on the top of the axle, I would still have 2 inches from the bottom of this fuel line to the top of this ear, and that's why I did it that way. All right, so here's the routing underneath the truck. I have a good 1/4 inch gap between the lower cab and any of the fuel lines at any time. So there's plenty of room, and just for safety concern, I am gonna be adding a little piece of neoprene rubber ever so often as a shim to keep it from ever contacting under here. But these ADO clamps did a really good job. What's kind of cool about them is that once you get the tubing set, you can kind of squeeze them down and it lowers the tubing down. So I really like that a lot. Those of you with a keen eye may have noticed that the rear section of my hard lines are mounted to the frame, where the front section is actually mounted to the cab. Ordinarily, this would be a big no-no, because traditionally speaking, truck cabs are isolated from their frames using bushings. But that's just not the case on this truck. Right here, I have a plate welded down to this mount. I have a plate welded to the actual truck cab itself, and a 3-inch piece of DOM in between that's welded. So for all intents and purposes, the cab of this truck is one with this frame. And for added security later, when I do install the roll cage, so you'll have your cage in here, it'll be gusseted to the A-pillars and these rear pillars right here. Then I'm gonna have some plates that I weld in up underneath behind this rocker. I'm gonna have tubes that come down to the frame, and then the tubular front end will come out right here from the cage on the inside, out, mount somewhere up here. And then lastly, we'll have the rear cage either come out from up here or down there, and it'll go over the top of the C-notch. So, ergo, the cab is one with the frame, therefore there's no movement in between. Let's wrap this video up by installing the Holley Hydramat. Okay, here's the setup I'm working with. As you guys know, I'm gonna have to make a few adjustments to get all of this working properly. So the supply port's gonna have to go here now, and I'm gonna move this return over to this side. We have a Walbro 255 in-tank pump. Over here, I have a Holley Hydramat. This is a 15 by 15 inch cross. I have the Holley adapter for the Walbro, so this actually goes on there. And then here's the adaption connection. It's a little MPT that goes onto this, and then it goes to this. Then we have the magnetic mounting kit. So the ones that have the studs go on the ears of the Hydramat, and the ones that don't go on the outside of the fuel cell. Well, as I was taking this thing apart, it dawned on me that I actually have the wrong fuel pump. This is a Walbro GSS 340, which, as you can tell, has the large singular centered inlet, unlike the 341 and 342 pumps. Now, this is a genuine unit, is a nice unit, there's nothing wrong with it, but this isn't gonna work for the application. So I went hunting around in my storage unit, and I just so happened to find the right one right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this one and we'll continue. Just some gee whiz info on these things in case you were curious is that Walbro pumps are actually made by a company called TI Automotive. So these are in fact genuine pumps. It's just, they're not called Walbro anymore. They've been manufacturing their pumps for several decades now, I think. So they just haven't been called that in a long time. Now, the GSS 340 has the same 255 liter per hour designation as the rest of these pumps in the series, but you can tell it has the singular centered inlet. This one has the 11 millimeter inlet and then your standard outlet up here, and they're in line with one another. So this is the 342, and you'll know that there's another one called a 341. The 341, the only difference is that the 11 millimeter inlet is on this side. It's offset from the outlet. It's moments like this when I really appreciate well-engineered parts. Here we have the Holley adapter. You can see the O-ring sealing surface and all the CNC provisions to fit on the backside of the pump, and it fits perfectly, literally no wiggle room whatsoever. The instructions say to tighten this adapter down between 20 and 24 foot-pounds. It also says, do not use PTFE pipe tape or sealant paste. I know it's NPT, but hey, they designed this thing. I'm gonna go with what they recommend. So I went ahead and torqued it down to 20 foot-pounds just to give me a little room to rotate it around if I need to on the hanger assembly. All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and call it for this video. It is extremely late. I've been working on the fuel system all day, and now I'm starting to lose all the tiny little battles. My brain is starting to feel like this connection strained. Obviously, that's a problem that I'm gonna have to fix. I'm not too stoked about the orientation either. As of right now, it's not conducive to the footprint of the Hydramat because it's sitting too far over right in the fuel cell. So I definitely need to clock this differently so it sits in the proper orientation. I think I'll do is I'll back this NPT fitting out, put a 90 degree on there and run brand new in-tank submersible hose with a more stress-free kind of design to the top of this fuel pump, or I might just loop it from here and move it to the other side. I'm not really sure yet. I'll put it in the next video, but yeah, I'm pretty beat right now, but you guys get the general idea, honestly. You know, it's real simple. You just make sure there's no obstructions. You make sure this thing's not smashing to the floor of the fuel cell and it's not too high off of it. You want to make sure it's not interfering with the float on your fuel sending unit. This one has a 90 degree bracket that kind of comes off and it goes over here. So as long as I put it in there like this, it's not going to interfere. But yeah, like I said, you know, from the bottom of the fuel cell to the top of this gasket, it's a little over 10 inches from the bottom of the Hydramat to the bottom side of this hanger assembly is about a little over 10 inches. So we're good there. But anyway, as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Cheers.